Let's talk about making mistakes today. One of the things that I hear frequently is how certain projects or certain people or certain ecosystems are just doing everything that's great. They're doing something and it's not working, but they take no responsibility on their own. Essentially, all the fault lies with the external factors. None of it lies on potentially internal factors, and um, that's wrong. That's just in any relationship, in any kind of partnership, in any situation. There are multiple variables to why something would or would not work. And this idea, this concept that if a project is going in a particular direction and it's not gaining traction, that all of it can be attributed to external factors and that none of it should be attributed to perhaps internal factors, and that there should be no introspection in terms of perhaps why we are doing things in a certain way that may not be gathering traction and or may not be essentially value add. I don't know what the reticence, there's so much reticence, and I don't know if that's throughout the ecosystem. I would imagine that in general, that's a trait that can be found throughout. But in EOS, I guess because I'm so deep into it, I see that this is one of our, definitely one of our faults, and one thing that's definitely holding us back. And so the ENF obviously will make mistakes, has already made mistakes, will continue making mistakes. I said that in the interview that I had with Dan not too long ago. One of our issues is that we have not been making, arguably, enough mistakes. And what I mean by that, it's not to say that when you attempt to do something, you set out to go and make mistakes and you're setting out knowingly to fail. What I mean by that is that ultimately, if you make no mistakes or if you have not failed, that means that you've likely not tried anything, that you've not taken any risks. And what we need to get better at is not making fewer mistakes per se, is making more controlled, more informed decisions, ultimately knowing and doing a risk profile matrix of what are the types of mistakes that potentially could be the outcome or the result of this particular direction, and can we mitigate for that? Can we take that into account prior to, during the architectural or the decision making process, so that should we make mistakes, and when inevitably we make mistakes, that we've already essentially taken that into account, or that we've already accounted for that and hedged against that. And so right now I'm having a discussion with some people about a certain project and how they're not getting any traction, and how all of it is due to EOS, the lack of support in EOS, the lack of funding in EOS, the lack of users in EOS, but how the product is great. And yeah, it's true. In EOS, we have really amazing products. However, one of the things that I keep getting back to is one, marketing and business development we have been extremely bad at. And those are mistakes that we've made. And it is important to address those mistakes, to bring forth and to acknowledge that perhaps those are areas that we need to improve on. There's nothing wrong with that. But there's sort of this self-defense mechanism that kicks in when you have a discussion with somebody or a project or a team or people, and you try to highlight and or to address perhaps those shortcomings and areas that ultimately could be improved on, and they take that as and I'm faulty as well. I do that as well. I have that natural tendency to react very defensively when somebody and or entities call out on things that I am doing that should be improved on. So I recognize that I have that issue as well. And so I think it's important to, not just for me, but for all of us, to recognize that we have certain strengths, that we have certain areas that we should improve on, and to try and at least to a certain extent be open to making mistakes, making more controlled and reasoned mistakes, but ultimately meaning that we are trying more frequently. We are attempting to move forward. If we don't do so, essentially, we are not even trying to move forward out of fear of making mistakes. if we also don't uh, acknowledge that we've made mistakes and or that we will make mistakes, we are inevitably hindering ourselves from progress. And that is a mindset that needs to change. I remember hearing a few years back, I don't recall who it was, but it was a very prominent female CEO who said that her father, when she was growing up, would have an exercise when they came home, and he would ask all of the children at the dinner table, what they had failed at today. And what she said that did for her, the idea was that making mistakes or failing was no longer seen intrinsically as being bad. It basically highlighted, and what resulted out of that exercise over years of doing this, it resulted in her being comfortable and being way more prominent and or stronger in taking risk, controlled risk, in order to be able to make mistakes. And so the father would ask, name me one thing that you failed at today. And, she would say, I failed at, I don't know, I failed at baseball today. I tried I got struck out or something like that. And what that did is that instead of associating failure being negative, it associated failure very much psychologically. It associated failure with attempting to do something, with trying to do something. And it removed a lot of the stigma out of making mistakes. Again, I'm not glorifying making mistakes. I'm not saying that we should attempt to make mistakes, to fail purposefully in order to create waste or in order to extract value on purpose. I'm saying that we need to get better at making mistakes and recognizing that making mistakes inherently is not bad. We can learn from those mistakes. What we do in those situations is what's important. That's where we need to get better at. How we take risks and how we decide to move forward is what we need to get better at. But making mistakes is not inherently bad, and acknowledging mistakes is not inherently bad. Thank you for listening. What do you think?